To think for yourself, you must question authority and learn how to put yourself in a state of vulnerable, open-mindedness, chaotic, confused vulnerability to inform yourself. Think for yourself, question authority,
Hello and welcome to this Church of Nothing where we worship no one. And today we're going to discuss the very fun topic of grief. Some of us are confronted with our own mortality. Some of us have grieved over the loss of others, whether it be people, pets. And it's a subject that for the non-religious is a bit tricky. Obviously, there's no end to this subject in secular philosophy, but I really like the idea of looking into how a non-religious person can grieve. And I want to confront this topic with Betsy DeVille, who has written a really cool book about grieving for atheists. And it's an interactive book. And I think that's one of the cooler parts about this, is that this book asks you questions, which is a very cathartic thing for someone going through grief. And there's, as I said, it's interactive. So what you give this book is part of it. And it, from what I've seen, it's definitely something that could give people a great new look at what grief is in a world where most of the people responsible for consoling the grieving are religious figures or therapists. She has a really novel approach to this. So welcome, Betsy. Thank you for coming here.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So what inspired you to write this book? Was it I believe it was the grieving over your parent, your mother?
Yeah. The death of my mom. So my mom had Alzheimer's. And so it was a long goodbye, right? And when she passed away, I am not religious, and I looked for resources for people who aren't religious. And there wasn't really much available. And I really wanted to understand, is what's happening to me normal? You know, what should I expect? What are the tools that I have available to cope with this experience? And so when nothing existed, and I already have a secular gift shop, I decided, if not who, me, right? And when, now, right? So I worked with a lot of experts. I worked with neurologists. I worked with grief and trauma specialists. I worked with hospice nurses to really try to get everything right. And as you said, the book is interactive. I really want readers to understand what's happening in their bodies and their brains when we experience grief, and understand what tools are available to help you. And also understand some things about grief that we really get wrong. So one of the things that can happen when you experience grief is this is one of my favorites, is somebody's going to talk about the 5 stages of grief, right? And it's this idea that there's a particular linear order that people are all going to go through, and then you're done. Ta-da, right? And it came to light with a researcher named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And the way she actually created these 5 stages was by studying people who were actively dying. And believe it or not, it used to be, if I was in what we would today call hospice, but this is before hospice existed, if I was actively dying, my provider may not tell me. They might tell my family that I'm dying, but they wouldn't necessarily tell me. They would say something like, "Oh, we're doing more tests." And they would kind of tuck me away in this corner of the hospital or wherever I was being cared for until I faded off, right? And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross went around and interviewed all of these patients and learned that they had a lot of feelings, which for us today is not a real big surprise, but it was pretty groundbreaking at that time. And she documented those feelings and then started applying them to people experiencing grief in this linear pattern. And she wrote a big book about it. And, human brains, we love a pattern. Love it. We love to make patterns when they don't even exist. And so pop culture really latched onto this notion of these 5 stages of grief and really just still has not let go. I've actually been asked to consult on, hey, I'm writing an article about the 5 stages of grief. Can you please? And I'm like, no, actually, I can't. And the thing that's really important about knowing about the 5 stages of grief and how they emerged is that can be very harmful. So if I'm experiencing grief, one of the things that when I talk to secular people experiencing grief is they would wonder, what stage am I in? Like, am I doing this right?
Yeah.
That's unhelpful. And the truth is, if you're experiencing grief, you're probably already doing it right.
Right. So it's not as orderly as that, and it's not always going to be the same sequence, but is there any redeemable aspect to that notion? Is there what do you think is valid in this idea of the stages of grief?
Well, I would say what is also true about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the 5 stages of grief is as she got older, she let go of them too.
Mm-hmm.
She said, wait, hang on. We are taking this too far. Grief is not a linear process, period, full stop. It's just not. I think a more helpful way, if you need an analogy around grief, is a bubble in a box. So from the time that I start experiencing the grief, it is this bubble in a box. And the bubble is constantly touching the sides of the box, always there, right? But over time, either the box gets bigger because my world gets bigger. Some people like the ball getting smaller, but I think the box gets bigger. And so it is a less frequent occurrence where the side of the ball, which is my grief, crashes into the wall of the box and I have a big grief experience. Other people like a notion of waves, that waves are going to come. And at first they're going to come really fast and really hard, but then they will come less fast and less hard, and you will also learn to ride them. Grief never actually goes away. We just learn to carry it.
Yeah. I like to think of the example of I used to have mild aerophobia. I would travel, and I love traveling, but I'd have some turbulence, I'd have a bad flight, and I'd have like 3 hours of being mildly afraid, and I have a very vivid imagination. I'm just like imagining crashing the whole time. And I'm like, I thought about it, and I'm like, the bad part of a plane crash is the horror of going down. The impact is like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the worst part is the fear, the horror. Fear is anticipating the experiencing of this descent. If I'm afraid for no reason, anticipating that horror, then I might as well be in a plane crash. I am experiencing a form of suffering. And I got to the stage, in order to get over my aerophobia, I got to the point where I was like, not only am I not going to be afraid when everything's okay, I'm going to get to the stage where even if we start going down, if I see fire out that window, I want to be at peace, because in that situation, I can't help that plane. There's nothing I can do. I might be able to console whoever I'm with, but I am powerless in that situation. And it's a great metaphor for life when confronting your own mortality. Like, you see images. I remember when those Paris riots were happening, there was this video of this couple enjoying wine and eating bread as there was a riot of fire behind them. People were, shooting guns and freaking out. And I admired how they were enjoying their wine and bread in this chaos. And I'm like, that's such a great example of how we can, let go of, and this is confronting your own death. I think when grieving over someone else, it's a different example, but I just wanted to share that example as far as confronting your own death. If you know that your death is imminent, I just like that example of sort of conquering the fear of flying as one.
Yeah. Yeah, I talk in the book with readers about don't believe everything you think because our brains will tell us things that are wrong. Some of the things that our brains will tell us fall under a category we call catastrophizing. That means worst possible scenario. I will never be loved again. And how to engage in a practice called cognitive reappraisal, which is where I remind myself that that thought is not helpful. Because a thought is, I'm going to tangent here. When I say a thought is not true and I try to help my brain convince myself that something isn't actually true, brains are really good at finding reasons to make things true. They're awesome at that, right? But if I identify that the thought is not helpful, this thought is not making my day better, it sometimes can help me detach a little bit from a catastrophizing thought process, use some cognitive reappraisal, which is where I'm going to look at what I'm actually experiencing in a way that is completely true and doesn't include this sort of catastrophizing thing. So, instead of I will never be loved again, like I appreciate that I had that love in my life and I know that that love is possible. The other thing that I think is helpful for people to know is around cognitive reappraisal is another thing called ruminating, right? Where I keep
Right.
going over woulda, coulda, shoulda, how I should have done this, whatever, that sort of a thing. And also using cognitive reappraisal and self-talk practices. Those can be super helpful as well for folks who find themselves in that circle, right? Where I can't get out of the circle, where I'm laying in bed at night and I'm ruminating or I'm catastrophizing. So I think that skill of cognitive reappraisal is very helpful. And I find that a secular audience is very interested in evidence-based opportunities. Many folks in the secular audience that I've talked with have felt that they are not the type of person who might go to see a traditional therapist. And yeah, these are the very tools that you might get from a therapist, is understanding how to use cognitive reappraisal, how to build a self-care practice that's effective for you, and how to make sure that you are going to do what works, because you have to
Yeah.
test and find out.
Yeah. I think another thing is like I worked on an animal sanctuary. I worked in an animal sanctuary for a while that would adopt animals that were already in a horrific situation. They'd be elderly animals. They would already have some sort of condition. And so basically with, 700 of these adopted animals, every single week, a creature that I found adorable and, spent more time with than humans would pass away. Sometimes in tragic ways, like my favorite turkey hen uh, didn't go into her house at night, and a fox ate her, and it just I
Oh
would have
gosh,
all
I'm
of these
sorry.
grieving situations, these little grieving situations, and then added to that, other people couldn't relate to them. I can't go to my buddy that I go
Mm-hmm.
work out with at the gym and be like, "Oh, I'm sad because the turkey died." So I keep a lot of this stuff in, but would accidentally help me. I'm sure you've realized this too, is being strong on behalf of the other people that worked for me. Because I was the only man there, I played this role of like, I would sometimes sort of grieve alone when no one was
Mm-hmm.
watching. But when I was in the presence of the crying women, I would find myself like being, I would have to console them, and I would be trying to be the productive one while everyone's sad. And there was something, and I see a lot of parents have that strength on behalf of their children, and there's something about that, and not just hiding away when
Mm-hmm.
grieving, but actively trying, being the strong one at the funeral. Sometimes is very comforting in itself. Not only are you helping the others, it's a way to grieve. You know.
Yeah, there's within grief, we think of instrumental grief and intuitive grief. And those are different ways that people are going to deal with grief. Something that's really interesting within grief is, again, am I doing it wrong? So if I am experiencing grief, but I can still show up at work and do my job and stay effective and engaged in my role, and I just have had a horrific tragedy, people might think, oh, they're so cold. What's wrong with them? Why aren't they sad? Right?
Hmm.
But if I come into work because I have to, because I don't have good bereavement leave policies, and I am a mess, and I can't remember anything, and I cannot get my act together, and I can't remember my password, I might hear a message of, they need to pull it together, right? But these two ways of grieving are normal for everyone, and most folks sort of oscillate between the two and get judged, I'll say, either way, right?
Mhm.
And then the other thing that I think is really interesting that you touched on briefly is I live in North America, and there are very specific gender expectations here. And so it is more allowable for me as a female to be the one who can't remember the password to my computer and be a hot mess over here. But the male gender is expected to hold it together, right? Like you're
Yeah.
not allowed to keep a stiff upper lip. Boys don't cry, right? And those things can also be super, super unhelpful. But some people find that buckling down and getting it done is how they're going to deal. And they may have sad moments at home. They may grieve very privately, as you have. But there's nothing wrong with either one of those approaches. And again, you're not doing it wrong. This is just your grief experience, and it's going to be unique to just you and what you're going through.
Yeah. And as non-religious people, a lot of people, they'll ask, oh, would you tell an elderly person on their deathbed that the evidence that Jesus isn't real? Or would you tell a child in the leukemia wing of a hospital that, and it's like, obviously I'm not going to go out of my way to debunk whatever religious belief they've already been given. However, the idea that we're the inherently negative ones comes from people not really reading the Bible as much, because I think the modern American Christian has this whole, it's honestly, I wish they would start a new religion, because this new Jesus they've thought of is amazing. But the idea that I'm the negative one, it's like, if anything, if I were to, let's say I hypothetically did disprove Christianity to a child that was dying, I'm taking away the fear of a negative afterlife. Obviously, we're telling all of these people that they're going to heaven, but when you read the details of these religions, the afterlife is not necessarily, it seems more likely that you'll have a negative afterlife. So if anything, we're taking the fear of a negative afterlife away. I mean, I think atheists have their different views of what the afterlife could be, but for me, the act of non-existence is as easy after life as it was before our life. If I cease to exist, and I hope it would be great if there was some heavenly utopia after this, but if I just cease to exist, yeah, that's a cause for a little bit of fear. I get that. I'm not trying to dismiss the fear completely, but it was easy to not exist at all prior to our life. So I don't
You
really
were
don't
great
think.
at it. You did a
Yeah,
great job.
yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things you touched on with kids specifically is something I've observed, and I was raised Catholic,
Me
is
too.
cognitive dissonance. So one of the things where you could have a problem if with grief is cognitive dissonance about how I think I'm supposed to feel and how I actually feel. So maybe there's a scenario where I had a stepfather, let's say a person had a stepfather who was actually abusive, but they were a pillar of the community. And they
Hmm.
don't actually like their stepfather, and they're secretly glad they're dead. But everyone is expecting them to be grieving the loss of this pillar of the community. And they are not allowed to tell the truth about who they really were, right? So they might experience some cognitive dissonance. But another one that is maybe even more relatable is around small kids. So I was attending a funeral for some small kids, with some small kids who were, it was an end of life funeral for their grandfather, beloved grandfather, just a wonderful human being. And they were raised in a Christian tradition where they believed that their grandfather had now gone to heaven. And they had cognitive dissonance around, they were told that they needed to be happy that grandpa was in heaven. But
Yeah.
grandpa's not here with me, playing with me. And I remember seeing these kids pasting these big smiles on their faces with tears going down their cheeks because they really just wanted their grandpa, you know?
Yeah.
What I think, though, is what I think maybe most folks would potentially agree on is that if someone is not alive anymore, if they're dead, that they're not hurting and they're not scared. And I
Yeah.
could tell you for my mom with her Alzheimer's, that has brought me great comfort.
Yeah, there are definitely worse things than death. I've seen people suffering. Anytime you've seen someone suffer or degrade slowly,
It's
clearly
awful.
the absence of life
Mm-hmm.
is less suffering. And I'm not necessarily strictly utilitarian, but the suffering seems to have ended when someone. I mean, I don't
Mm-hmm.
pretend to know. Who knows what happens. I've seen all sorts of secular theories. Like you see people say, like, oh well, time. We perceive time linearly, but the past exists, the future exists, and so there's all these like sort of secular ways of finding heaven. But at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, I think one of the things you're trying to get through is addressing the grief, not coming up with wishful thinking optimism.
Mm-hmm.
If you can find it, great. But what happens at funerals, what happens when people die is everyone's just trying to say these little platitudes to make someone feel better. And it's like, what if this deserves a moment of sort of cathartic grief, and then I can move on. If I hide this and you just tell me, oh well, he's in a better place and everything's fine, I'm not really doing the work, you know.
And it's denying your reality, which is really unhelpful. And I think that's another thing that can be really difficult for secular people that I talk about in the book and really help folks prepare for. And that is unhelpful comments, right? So they may be very well meaning, and well meaning comments I will take for what I believe them to be, which is well meaning. Some people that I've spoken with have been attacked verbally, that it was somehow their fault that someone had died. And I want to take a moment and say grief doesn't just mean death. We can
Yeah,
grieve the loss of a season of life. We can grieve the loss of a limb. We can grieve the loss of a relationship. Many, many, many things. And I think all of the things we know to be true about grief still very much apply. But those unhelpful comments and how you want to respond to them is something that I really encourage secular people to prepare themselves for, because when you're experiencing grief, you are really not, your brain slows down. So you'll notice when you read the book, the chapters are short and tight, and that is by design. So I really wrote the book for a grieving brain, because grieving, when our brains are grieving, they are working really hard, kind of trying to build a whole new map of our world. And so it can be really hard. You can find some sort of cognition issues that might occur. Plus, your sleep might be terrible, which also affects your cognition. So when I wrote it, I intended it to be very accessible to someone who's experiencing grief. But what I think is also important for people experiencing grief is, what am I going to say when I go to a funeral or a celebration of life and someone tells me that they're in a better place? Like, am
yeah,
I going to tell them that actually is not comforting to me? Or am I not going to? Like, how do I want to deal with this? And most people that I know that are secular are not secular in every aspect of their life. Not every single person who knows them knows about their lack of belief, because it can be uncomfortable. I know for me, I could lose my job. So, so we have to really think about that and setting some boundaries for ourselves. And I really encourage secular people to do that ahead of time so that they are prepared going in with how I might handle this conversation. The other thing that I think it's important for secular people to think about is, how am I going to take care of myself? Because if not everybody knows what I actually believe in, what toolbox can I build for myself to ensure that I am taking time to reflect on what happened and building rituals that are meaningful. There's a grief theory that I like very much called continuing bonds. And what it talks about is, so Freud, who I think we all know, really felt like with grief, you basically had to just let go of what you've lost and kind of like move on. And that's not really a realistic goal. And on the flip side, continuing bonds theory says, even though this thing, this person I loved or whatever is now gone, that doesn't mean my relationship is over. It just means it's irrevocably changed. And I'll give an example. Dear friend of mine, her father passed away. She and her father weren't particularly close when she was growing up because her parents were divorced. And in order to really celebrate his memory every year, she has the Day of Dad, where she goes out and she does something that she knows her dad would enjoy. So let's say he loves muscle cars. She'll go out and go to a car show, and it's a way she stays connected and still has a relationship with her dad, even though he's not there. And those kinds of practices, I think, can be a lot more helpful, particularly for secular people.
Yeah. One topic within this topic that I have my own example, but without going through a really depressing story, I'm going to sum it up with, I was in a situation where a pet of mine died, and in the circumstance, I felt partially responsible because I didn't bring the cat to the vet early enough. And then on the way of speeding to the vet, a cop stopped me, made me wait like a half an hour. And then, so I had this like guilt and anger. The anger was towards a cop who's now out of my life. I can't do anything. I can't even be passive aggressive to this guy. He's gone. Mm-hmm. And so all of that negative energy I had towards him went all into the container of guilt that I had for not responding early enough. And I was met with, and I was living totally alone. This cat was like he was everything to me at the point. And so I was confronted with this just insane amount of guilt. I had taken all of the rage and just put it all into guilt, rage towards myself. I started smoking cigarettes. I had quit cigarettes. I was chain smoking, like masochistic. I was just so consumed with guilt. And so as far as grieving goes, I think grieving in just a melancholy for someone passing away is different than if you feel responsible. Because a lot of people, they take their lives, they do self-harm. I think guilt, when you blame yourself, and obviously there's no one way to just absolve someone. Like, what if someone actually does have a reason to be guilty? I know that there's no one thing you can just say to address that. But have you looked into the idea of like when people wear guilt in the wake of a death?
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, it's funny as you shared that story. So I foster neonatal kittens, and they are fragile little fellas, And as you were telling that story, I remembered one that we had lost where I missed something because I trusted the information that I was given from the foster group, and we lost the kitten. And I still carry that guilt of like, I can't believe I missed this because I just believed what they told me about what was happening with the kitten. Anyway, so I can't say I'm an expert there because I still do carry guilt. It still is on my mind. But what is true there is that cognitive reappraisal skill. So what's true is when I look back at that story, I did what I thought was best in that moment, right? With the information and experience that I had. If I could go back, which time travel is not yet possible, I would do things differently. But I can't do that. And so now I'm just like, I just have to use that information and go forward. Like I can't go back in time, and everything in that moment where I didn't respond as fast as I should have because I didn't know. Yeah. That's what
you realize that you're fallible. You're not perfect. And so you can forgive yourself. Yeah. You got to like sort of look at whatever situation it was. It's different for everyone in different situations. But
we're not omnipotent. We can't know.
Yeah. And, obviously if you had bad intentions, then you should feel guilty. One thing that actually, it gave me some weird solace is I remember, so I was living in Vermont at the time, and I'm from a very civilized area. Now I'm living in the woods, and the next week, I feel like the devil himself. How could you not realize that you should have brought him to the vet yesterday when he was a little bit lethargic, you know? And then I meet this guy who he's talking about how he works at the slaughterhouse and he finds it hilarious. And he was just like reveling in sadistic, like, man, I fucking hate him. And he was just so evil towards animals that I'm like, oh, I feel like so bad that I didn't bring my cat to the vet early enough. This guy revels in the pain of others. Like he takes delight. And so that sort of comparing, if you're dealing with guilt, you have to sort of evaluate how guilty should you feel. Maybe you should feel guilty, but if you had good intentions and you just made a mistake, then maybe it's not deserved. And at the end of the day, we have emotions for the most part, seemingly, to change our behavior. And so if I feel guilt because I didn't bring my cat to the vet early enough, well, that's constructive for the next time I see a similar symptom with another animal or a person. And I think, oh, remember last time you procrastinated? And so just like, the feeling of love can drive you to, build a life and a family with someone, and the feeling of, these emotions have some sort of purpose. It shouldn't be our mission to just sort of quell our emotions for comfort. That's the utilitarian sort of pursuit of comfort. I sort of like the idea of like addressing what is real about this emotion, but not letting the emotion just sort of stagnate us. Because if I just sit there smoking cigarettes all day feeling bad, that doesn't help, the future.
And sometimes there are feelings kind of underneath, right? So I might feel angry, right? But really what I'm feeling is sad and hopeless, or, whatever. But it's easier to feel angry, right? Anger feels powerful. But feeling bereft, you feel empty, right? You feel small. And so it's useful.
It's inwards.
Yeah. So there's actually, in the book, there's an activity where you go through your feelings and really evaluate, what am I feeling? And it gives you an opportunity to, for the scenario where I might have very mixed feelings about this loss. Maybe this loss now presents new opportunities in my life, and then I might feel guilty that I'm looking at that, what we might think of as a silver lining. But it's really useful to really explore those and understand, and name them for yourself, because sometimes there's a feeling underneath where we realize, well, actually, I'm not angry. I'm just sad. Or actually, I'm a little bit happy because I was a primary, and maybe there's a case where someone was a primary caregiver for somebody, and now suddenly they have more free time, right? And they might feel guilty about looking forward to being able to go on a trip that they weren't able to ever go on because the caregiving role was so important. So there can be a lot of feelings about our feelings that are useful to investigate.
Yeah. It's funny. You said you were originally Catholic, and so was I. And I feel when you're an agnostic or atheist or secular person, whatever flavor you are of non-believer, it matters what you once were. And I think that, you can be a Baptist atheist, you can be a Buddhist atheist. Richard Carrier was like a Taoist, or his parents like raised him under some Asian religion. And so it really affects you. So I consider myself a Catholic atheist, and I find myself sort of at war with what I was taught as a kid. But then I've spoken to people. I've had a lot of chats that I haven't posted. Sometimes they go a little wrong. And so one of them was with a Palestinian, and it was such a mess of a talk that I didn't want to post it. I was so, I felt like if I post this talk that became so messy, I might affect people politically. It didn't seem like it would put Palestinian culture in the best light. And I care about them, and I didn't want to and I had a similar thing with an IDF soldier. That was the opposite thing. I was like, I didn't want to post that because I didn't want to enter the political ring too strongly. And the one thing I can take from it that really shocked me, and I don't know if you have the tools to deal with this either, but because I realized, wow, I'm a Christian atheist when he said this. I was talking about how sad the situation was, and he was like, brother, don't worry about it. Everything's fine. We're all going to our heaven. Everyone that's died is totally fine. And he was in complete peace over it. And I was more upset than he was. He was like, oh, everything's fine. The end will come where vengeance will be had. Like, he just had this complete, utter confidence and faith in everything being totally fine, as I was mortified about what was going on with his people and what he had just escaped. And it was so strange how he was happy. He was in a better, he wasn't faking it. He was genuinely trying to calm me down. Like, don't worry about it. I'm like trying to motivate him to be angry. And it was just such a strange thing to be confronted with, how the goal is not to be at peace and to just be happy. Like, he was clearly, it's so hard to wrap my head around that, how like he had achieved a happier, comfortable state, but it wasn't appropriate. He should have been upset.
That's something I've actually just started to explore in a book that I'm just starting. I'm so interested in self-determination, so my ability to make choices about my own life and agency. And when we think about things like superstition and religious beliefs, where, from that lens with which he's viewing, it's all decided outside of him, right? So this is already decided. I don't really have to hold myself accountable for killing or something like that, because it's all sort of decided, and I'm not responsible, versus what responsibility do I have to myself, to my fellow people who live on this planet? And what happens when religion gets into the mix? And do you get to a place where you feel a little lighter because you're not actually in charge, right? I feel sometimes like for secular people, and there's I think he's Irish, an Irish musician called Hosier, who talks, there's a song he does
Really
called
good.
There's No Hand at the Wheel, right?
Yeah.
There's no hand at the wheel, right? So it's like, it's on me to be the best I can be and to help everybody else, because there's nobody else here who's going to do it. But that tension is very interesting to me, is the lightness that they are perceiving that we don't perceive, because we're like, well, hang on, they're killing children. That's not okay. There's no world in which that's okay. But in this instance, they felt that was.
It's all part of a plan.
Yeah. Like, I
right.
find that so.
Yeah. So we have too much
interesting.
agency as secular people. We feel that
It's heavy. It's a
makes
weight.
a lot of
it's
sense.
A weight.
Religious people, maybe they are in a way happier, and maybe in a way we're taking too much responsibility. And it's not, I don't think it's inherent with just, so I know I have a lot of extreme examples in my life. One of them is someone who was from the Soviet Union, and they have a form of atheism where it's just not even there. Like, there's no, let's have a podcast and talk about how Jesus isn't real. It's not there. It was replaced by a government culture, a cult of personality. And so it's just like, not interesting. This conversation wouldn't interest them. And it's just like, and they have the same sort of complacency in this situation where they're not focused on addressing and confronting these sort of darker things in life. And so I think it might be inherent to the Catholic atheist culture. We have a specific, just like you could be, an ex-Muslim would have a different mentality than us. Maybe that has something to do with it.
I think it's interesting how you noted that the notion of a higher power in Russia was replaced by the government, because I think the cultural experience there is also, you don't have any control.
Yeah.
Right. So it's maybe very huge. Similar. Like, I don't have any control of you're just riding the ride.
Right.
Yeah, which is so interesting. And there's that comfort there that can be really attractive, because when you think about the weight of knowing I'm driving the bus, like I'm the bus driver here. I know I have to decide when the bus is going to stop or what passengers it's going to pick up on my ride on the blue ball. It's a lot. It's a lot. We think about. I feel like there's no one with greater urgency than an atheist, because we don't think we have time, and
Right.
we don't think that there's this higher power that's going to help. That's it. These are the two hands that I have to do as much good as I can while I'm here. That's it.
Yeah, I'll give you the most extreme example someone could give you too. So another extreme example of someone I've spoken to that they actually didn't want to be on camera, but I had a really interesting take. So he's 98 years old. He fought on the wrong side of World War II. He survived unimaginable things. His story is so it's amazing what he's survived, and he's so active and spry and sort of still at 98 is physically okay, and he has no dementia. He's not crazy. He is the best specimen for an elderly man I've ever met, and he's not happy with it. He doesn't like he softly, jokingly sort of makes these comments like he kind of can't wait for it to end. And I couldn't help but think it had something to do with him being Christian, because the things he says, he doesn't say he's in pain. He doesn't say that the only real complaint he has is that he said that, all of his loved ones are gone. His wife's gone. But after he says that, he talks about how he can't wait to see them again. So it was like the wishful thinking of heaven can take away from your life. If I was in his shoes and I got I can only imagine, but if I luckily got to 98 and I have my own agency, I have my own house, I'm athletic and spry, and I'm not experiencing dementia. It's like the best case scenario, besides having your wife survive with you. I would sort of have this sort of more appreciation, I imagine, than he does, because he sees it as one of these days, and he said something about that, how any day now, and that's a valid thing for him to say at 98, he's going to wake up in Never Never Land, and everything's going to be clouds and harps, and his wife's going to be there, and his old dog's going to be there, and there's something about that, about the positivity and the wishful thinking of a heaven that can take away from, especially someone that's elderly, their appreciation of what we know we have. We know we have this life.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I do think about, entropy always wins. And so as our bodies age, right, and we let go of relationships that we can't have anymore because the people have died or the relationship is now changed forever. Like if we don't continue to be additive, for this gentleman, like making lots of new friends and building new community. It's interesting to hear that he just basically yearned, it's like yearning for the good old days, right? They're gone.
Yeah.
That's not what's happening. But that is really interesting. And I do wonder if part of why humans have imagined this idea of an afterlife is, first, I think it's because we can't imagine ourselves not existing, but also thinking about that yearning. Everyone thinks about the good old days because we all have rose tinted glasses, because that's a normal thing. It's called a rosy retrospection, where we look back at past time periods and we think they were better than they were. You see this in political parties pretty frequently, like, where they want to see something the way it used to be, but that actually was not true at the time. It's just rosy retrospection.
And so we do that with the future too. We can do that with, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, let's go over some some basic, like if someone is grieving, someone's watching this right now, You have a lot of examples in your book, and that's the purpose of your book. But like, what are some genuine things to address because what I like about what you're doing is you're addressing the biological, physical thing that's happening. You're addressing with the facts that you have. You're not coming up with a wishful, lovey-dovey situation to comfort the reader. You're saying, this is what's going on in your brain, and this is what you can do. So, like, what are some examples, brief, like, what
Yeah,
can someone
absolutely.
do?
Yeah, so I would say if there were three beats to just take along with you, right? It would be to make sure you're being gentle with yourself and remember that your body and your brain are doing a lot of work right now. And so this is a great time to think about, how do I take care of, I think of my body as a machine that I live in. So I think about, what is the fuel that my machine needs, and what is the rest that this machine needs, and how do I make sure those things are happening. Your sleep might get to be real junky. Like, some people experiencing grief sleep all the time, because some people find that as an escape, right? Okay, that's
Yeah.
great. Some people have a lot of trouble sleeping. So thinking about, how do I take care of myself to be sleeping well? How do I take care of myself so that I'm eating well? You mentioned you had a grief experience where you started smoking, which you probably identified as like, this is not a good long-term practice for the machine that I live in, right? So you have to think about, how do I pivot to something that is more sustainable for the machine, right? So maybe somebody is going to eat a lot of sweets or whatever, but like, eventually you got to kind of bring it back to what the machine is doing. So, but being gentle with yourself. Remember, you're going to forget stuff. So set yourself up to write stuff down.
Yeah.
Forgive yourself for the things that your body and brain are going to do, and set yourself up. So make sure you're using all the tools available, as far as like alarms and reminders and those kinds of things. Because what is unfortunate is, when grief comes, we don't often get a break from the day-to-day grind of, getting bills paid and that kind of thing. I would say stay in the present is another really important beat to hit. Um, in this moment, what is true is a helpful way to frame, because it helps me reframe around rumination. It helps me reframe around catastrophizing. It helps me connect to cognitive reappraisal, so that I can stay in the present with what's true, and then learn from what works. So what is helping you have the best possible days, moments? Is it, I need to not have notifications on my phone in the morning because it sets me up for a tough day? Is it, I need to make sure that I have some music and some meditation at the end of my day so that I get a good night's sleep? And then do those things. Don't beat yourself up. Take care of you. And don't feel like it's indulgent or anything like that. It's mission critical to take care of yourself when you're experiencing grief. It's not an extra thing. It is the thing that you need to do. And on the flip side of that, maybe somebody who's listening to this has someone near them who's experiencing grief. And a lot of people, because I surveyed a lot of folks and talked to a lot of folks when I was working on this book, were like, I don't know what to do when someone's experiencing, I don't know what to say, right? Well, you want to think about what to not say, which is, it's okay. Don't minimize what happened. Don't ask inquisitive, unhelpful, prying questions, like, or try to relate to them. So one thing that sometimes people can happen is, let's say someone died of lung cancer because they had smoked. Well, then I might try to insulate myself as the outside party and be like, well, at least I don't smoke. Like, it was almost like it was their fault. I was like, well, you know what? When
Right.
they started smoking, they didn't think, you know what I want? I want lung cancer with a lot of suffering and then death. And then I want everyone around me to be super bummed. Nobody does
Hmm.
that, right? So make sure you're not approaching it in that way. Don't ask super prying questions. Don't try to minimize their loss. Don't try to, there's a thing called the ring theory. So what you want is, care should be going in and kind of dumping should be going out. So I don't want to dump in. So I don't want to tell you, when you're telling me about your grief experience, oh, something like that happened to me. Nope. That's not helpful to the person experiencing grief, because from their perspective, what they're experiencing is not very relatable to you. And what's more helpful for them to hear is, I'm really sorry that that happened. And then the other thing that people like to say is, what can I do? Right? But a better way to approach that, if you're able, is to do the emotional labor for them. So think about what you can do. Like, my neighbor's spouse passed away. I know their trash has to go to the curb every Tuesday. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to take your trash out to the curb. Is that okay? Yep, great. Every week, take the trash out. I see their lawn is getting a little long. Hey, I'm going to send somebody over to mow your lawn. Okay, awesome, done. Right? So I'm doing the things that I can do. I'm not forcing them to ask me for help, which we're all really terrible at, right? I'm just doing the thing.
Yeah.
And then stay connected, right? So grief is forever. It doesn't actually end. And what often happens for people experiencing grief is they kind of get a big, big bunch of attention. And then 4, 5, 6 weeks later, everybody thinks it's their time to go back to normal. I actually had a friend who her spouse had lost a parent, and they asked me, well, when is he going to be normal again? And they had passed away like a week ago. And I was like, he's not going to be normal again. This is a change in his life forever. He's never going to have his mom back. So he is finding his way into his new, how is he going to cope with this? So don't think they're going to be normal again, and keep reaching out. So those first holidays without the thing that's gone, super duper hard. So even if the loss was 9 months ago, it's the first time they're having Mother's Day or whatever without their loved one. So reach out, send them a text message, you know. I also think it's helpful to think about activities where we are next to each other and we have some organized structure around what we're doing. So not open-ended activities. So that might be something like, hey, I'm going to get tickets to this show. I can pick you up at 2:00 if you want to go. And then be prepared for them to say, I can't go, and just let it go. It's not about you. Like, you know, or playing games like Words with Friends or something like that can also be helpful because it lets them stay connected without it being about the grief experience, but it just has somebody popping in to say, I care about you and you're important to me.
Yeah. Because our mind is not a tactile thing we can grab, it's not as real sometimes. But if we use the metaphor of like a physical injury, like my thumb, I once was whittling a long stick and a knife came down, split my whole thumb in half. In that moment, the pain was just absolutely unbearable. I had to get this crazy surgery. I was in Mexico, so I had this very barbaric surgery. And in that moment, it seemed like there's no way my thumb will ever be a thumb again. It was completely off, not to be gory, but like it was unimaginable. I just figured this thumb is ruined forever. And it still it still has a wound. It still feels a little numb here, but it functions. I have a thumb again. And I think it's because our mind isn't something we can grab and see. It's so black and white. But I think, you know, if something bad enough happens to you, there is no sentence that should make you feel totally good. If you lose your child, like, should you ever be 100% gleeful and jubilant to the rest? Like, you should have happiness, you should have love, you should have good moments. But I think a grieving parent should, you know, it seems reasonable to always have your moments when you're reminded at Christmas, and there's a healthy way to have that grief. But I don't think anyone should try to trick you into never like totally moving on. Just like my thumb will always have a little bit of numbness.
Mm-hmm.
Someone
that's
that's lost their loved one should always have like a little, you know, we have our little scars on our skin, and we have when the older you get, the more you collect, and it's all on the other side of love.
Yeah.
I am not the most social person in the world. So I've been very lucky to not have to go to a lot of funerals. And so other people that have tons and tons of friends and loved ones, and someone that has 10 kids, and every time you love something, you're on the other side of that. If you lose that, or there are negative feelings. And so it's on the other side of love. Just like people get afraid to get a new dog because they were so sad at their old dog. You know, like there's all these examples of like, it's the other side of love. We have another word for it, grief, but it's a form of love. It's a sort of negative expression of the
Some people
loss
say
of.
grief is love with nowhere to go.
There you go.
Yeah,
Better
yeah. No,
worded.
your terminology is really cool. Yeah, I would say, yeah, people say like, I don't know what to say. Really just, I'm sorry. That's awful. And if you're a person who uses swear words, that's also an appropriate time if that's going to be heard by them, because it can be it could be the absolute worst thing that, that they've experienced in their lives. And just knowing that you see that for what it's true as the person providing support, and that you will continue to see that that is true,
Yeah.
day after day, month after month, year after year. I had a great conversation with a woman who, so in the United States, there's a thing called the Renaissance Festival. And these are festivals where we people dress up in costumes like they're in the Renaissance. There's going to be sword fighting. It's a whole thing, and you buy trinkets or whatever. And they typically move across the country with their shops and their show.
Yeah.
And people who work in the Renaissance Festival, some of them travel together, but not always. And so every time I get together at a Renaissance Festival from state to state, it's going to be a different group of people that I'm working with potentially. Some of them I know, but I haven't seen for a year. So this woman I was chatting with was saying how she shared with me that her husband had passed away. They had worked together in the Renaissance Festival. And she said one of the things that was so nice for her is she continued to have fresh support every stop, every month, because people were grieving with her because they were hearing the news of his death for the first time. So it was still so fresh for her. And she just continued to get new support coming in instead of a more traditional pattern. Because the United States...
Yeah, it's a limited resource, the sympathy you're going to get from your friends.
Yes, it is. It is. But for her, it was a fresh group all the time. And it was really, really helpful. And so I encourage people who are supporting a person who's experiencing grief. I'll put calendar entries in on a death anniversary or another date so that I get a reminder to reach out, because we're busy. And that's okay and allowed. But that gives me a cue to, hey, reach out and provide some support today because it's probably rough for them, or send a card, or, however that support is for you, just so that they know you're thinking about it, because they're thinking about it. A lot of times people don't want to bring it up. I don't want to bring it up. Mm-hmm. Guess what? They're already thinking about it.
That's a great point. Like the idea of I don't want to remind them. It's like
you don't need to.
They already are dwelling on it, most likely.
Yeah, they're very aware. So saying the name of the person that they lost, asking them to tell stories about them, or sharing your own. I know we had some children who had lost a parent, and sharing my stories with them about their parent, stories they had never heard before, also help them stay connected to their parent with that continuing bonds. Like, that friend of mine I was telling you about who seeks out something about her dad, it helps them stay connected too. And it helps them with their continuing bonds. So I would say, generally, don't be afraid to bring it up. Don't take it personally if they can't go to the thing. Just keep trying, just keep reaching out, and don't take anything personally as you're trying to provide support. Because after like week 3, no one's bringing casseroles, but they probably still can't make a meal. So Sometimes it's even better to do it delayed, where it's like, say hey in the first couple of weeks, and then really start pressing and showing up.
Yeah. So we've covered the grieving over others. And I'd like to take a moment for us to I've touched on it, but the idea of confronting our own mortality and sort of trying to understand it in a rational way without looking for wishful thinking, genuinely trying to understand this reality that we find ourselves in, confronted with the very apparent fact that it is a limited thing. The ride seems to end. Like I said, people have these, they look into sort of astrophysics, it seems like in quantum physics, there is no end or future. There's only those sorts of ideas. Mm-hmm. And I'll read a few quick quotes to inspire us real quick. Some great philosophers have touched on this. Epicurus said, death is nothing to us, for when we are, death has not come, and when death has come, we are not. Jean-Paul Sartre, life begins on the other side of despair. What's another good one? To lament, this is Michel de Montaigne. I forgot his last name. To lament that we shall not be alive 100 years hence is the same folly as to be sorry we are not alive 100 years ago. And Ludwig Wittgenstein, death is not an event in life. We do not live to experience death. So what is as someone who's written a book about death, how can we confront the fear of our own end?
That's an awesome question. I think that, we know nobody gets off the blue ball. I think it's important, at least for me. Here's what I do, right? Sample size of 1. I stay in the present, right? I cannot give energy or time to thinking about what my death is going to be, right? Is it going to be painful? Am I going to be scared? What's going to happen? I can give time to thinking about what do I need to do before then, right? I don't know if you have this, but I have like a fire in my bones to do as much as I can and do as much good as I can while I'm physically and mentally capable. And so I think for me, knowing I'm not going to get off the blue ball alive, it keeps the fire lit of do as much as I can with the time that I have. But yeah, I think for me, it's about staying in the present. I've not entertained any options around some sort of separate eternal life thing. That to me is a non-starter. It sounds great, but nope, I can't, there's just, I require great evidence there. But I'm also really into making sure I'm taking care of the body that I have, the machine that I live in, so that it does last me a good long time and can do lots of great stuff. Like that gentleman you talked about who's 98. I'm like, that sounds fantastic. To be 98.
If he only had the right mentality.
Right?
And he's not totally miserable all day. Like I know the man, and he actually has happiness. But when it's strange that, because I was telling him, you're so lucky. Like you're my hero, and that you're so healthy, and like my grandma has the health but doesn't have the mind. You see other people that have the mind but they're in a chair. I'm like, you're the guy, the first person that I've met, and he's popular in town. But he's just like, because of the heaven, he's in a rush. Surprisingly, you'd be surprised. Like he's at peace. It's this similar thing. It's a less extreme version of that Palestinian who was like too confident in an afterlife to where it's like, this seems to be actually a negative thing when you're so confident that you have this extra life after this. It seems like the positive thing, but there's something negative. We know that this life is real, even if it's a simulation. We know right now we are experiencing these moments. And in the future, I could tomorrow have a brutal end with pain, the worst case scenario. And just as I don't feel the pain of my thumb anymore, I don't feel that pain tomorrow. And so why should I preemptively feel that pain? Worry. Same thing when I said, like the airplane crash fear analogy. Why I definitely know that I shouldn't spend time worried about my death or in horror unless that emotion is going to elicit something good. So if I have a moment of, one day I'm going to be outside of our lifespan, there's the health span, which you just talked about, that being healthy. One day I'm going to be 80 years old. Today I can go for a run. Today I can go, I can do all these things. So if it elicits urgency, a healthy sort of urgency to take advantage, carpe diem, that's a useful use for these sorts of emotions. But if I'm just going to go, I'm going to die. No, I'm not going to take that flight. I'm going to be
Too risk
that's a
averse.
negative result
Mm-hmm.
of that emotion. Another example, I remember I was jamming with this older woman had asked me and my musician friend to jam one day. She just had this. She spontaneously asked us, "Can I play fiddle with you guys?" I was like, "Okay." And then she told me like she had survived cancer, and after she survived the cancer, she realized I play the violin, but I'm too scared to do anything about it. And after that, after she survived, she had this like lust for just to do it. Okay, what's
Mm-hmm.
the worst that's going to happen? I'm gonna not be the greatest violinist. Like and that's a positive
Mm-hmm.
reaction to the confronting of death. If we're going to have an emotion, it should elicit something not just productive, but something good in our actions. That's what the emotions are for. But maybe I don't want to say that too confidently.
Yeah, no, but I think I share that the fire in the bones and my willingness to fail is very high. Yeah, like I'll try stuff where I'm like, I'm going to be terrible at this, but that's okay because I'm
Hmm.
trying.
Right. Yeah. If you were, like someone who's written a book, like that took you had a sort of moment that elicited you being creative and getting something done. Let's say we go back and change your life, and your mother has a different scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you would trade your mother for a book, but like we can take our negative emotions and use them as fuel. And I
Mm-hmm.
found myself like when I was chain smoking cigarettes after my cat died, sitting in my bed in dread, in complete anxiety and self hatred, self loathing. That accomplished nothing. I didn't write a cool, sad song. I didn't write a book. I didn't do a podcast. Like it's okay to have a negative emotion. Sometimes that negative emotion is valid, but what are you going to do with that?
Yeah, but I would say if someone is listening to this podcast now and they're experiencing grief and they're also chain smoking, that's okay for right now. But you really need to not be doing that over the long term. As, yeah, I've
Right.
said this before. You can't put sand in your gas tank.
Yep. Yep. It's hard to judge people like when they're self harming or doing something to get some short term pleasure. It's hard to be like, hey, can you put the drink down? Like there, I
Yeah.
get it. Yeah, it's a tricky thing, but yeah. So Betsy DeVille, your book, Grief for Atheists.
Grief for Atheists. You
I
can find
nailed
it.
it. There was no
Most
the
places books are sold. Yeah. So
and
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, that sort of thing.
awesome. Yeah, I'll put a link below. Thank you so much, and let me know the next time you write a book. I think you have a lot of talent, and I suggest everyone to check this out. And thank you very much, Betsy, for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.